Hi, folks. We hope you like the lunch. Abby's Kitchen is doing our catering for this event. They've done a fine job so far, and they've been really helpful in increased quantities, so I hope everybody's gotten enough as our numbers picked up with the new registrants today. We have a lunchtime presentation, and then after that's over, we'll be breaking into concurrent session in this ballroom and ballroom 3. We'll get to that in just a minute. Right now, I'm going to introduce Mayor Bruce Botelho. Mayor Botelho served as the Alaska State Attorney General and is currently serving his 4th term as Mayor of Juneau. He's a member of the Tongass Futures Roundtable, serves on the Alaska Rural Justice and Law Enforcement Commission, is a director of the Alaska Municipal League, and past president of the Alaska Conference of Mayors. He is a former trustee of the Alaska Permanent Fund and an original trustee of the Alaska Children's Trust. He also served as a member of the Alaska Coastal Rainforest Center Coordinating Committee, and he served in our first year operating together as chair before he passed the baton. So please warmly welcome Mayor Botelho.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I just, on behalf of the citizens of Juneau, want to express my great welcome to you. Glad that you're here, and also glad that we could provide you a little of our better weather. Unlike most of you, I'm a layperson, and so perhaps this is doubly fascinating for me. I can assure you that there's been no time in my professional life that I've had 5 million year increments of measurement to look at an issue. And I was also struck this morning by Gordon's remarks about the map, because again, I think most of us around here assume that the Alsac, Taku, and Stikine river systems start at the border on the map where it's green, and it's just brown and flat on the other side. I think it actually points out the very importance of this kind of gathering, which is to highlight our connectivity to what is happening to the east, and indeed westward towards our mid-ocean as we look again southward and northward. I also have to say that last night I found Peter's presentation particularly stimulating, and I walked away with so many different thoughts that were kind of exploding, but 3 that particularly struck me. The first was his concept of the keystone species that will sustain us, certainly our dependency on them. The second was his crystallization of the polarization of conservation in American politics today. And I think that was evidenced by our visceral response to his graph showing the overwhelming bipartisan nature of the congressional votes dealing with the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts. And the final observation, which I will comment on, was his view of the uniqueness of Alaska, and that in turn was basically broken down into 2 parts. One which is the landscape itself, the second related to his sense that Alaskans place a premium on participation in and protection of their natural environment. And in support of that, he made reference to the 89% of Alaskans who, according to the poll conducted, think that there always should be enough money to protect salmon habitat. That wasn't the exact framing of the question, but fairly close. And I reflected on that and came to the conclusion that was actually a pretty safe and probably predictable outcome, because most Alaskans have a high degree of confidence that someone else will pay for it. And I was reminded of a form that showed up at one of our local assembly meetings. It's basically our local parliament, our city council. And perhaps a context, we, as in most governmental bodies, provide an opportunity for public testimony, either on non-agenda items or on specific issues that we're being called upon to decide. In any event, some years ago, and it was in the context of some controversy, someone with a sense of humor left a little form next to the place for people to sign in to testify. I thought I'd share it with you today because somehow Peter's remarks last night caused me to want to dig it out. It's captioned Generic Testimony Form. Line 1, name. Line 2, I have lived in town blank years, blank generations. Line 3, I oppose/support the, and then circle all that apply, campground, NOAA facility, road, cruise ships, tourists, helicopter school, police station, charter school, docks, speed bumps, subdivision, land sale, golf course, mine, water bikes, jet skis, trails, harbors, bike paths, street lights, crosswalks, parking lot, library, rock pit. 4, but I think it/they should be moved/located in A, Thane, B, North Douglas, C, Valley, D, out the road, E, Taku Harbor, F, the city of Douglas, G, right there next to the C line 3, or H, another more worthy neighborhood. 5, all expenses related to the project should come from A, someone else, or B, not me. And 6, revenue from the project should go to A, C line 1, that was name, B, a trust fund with my name on it, C, a worthy public cause, parens, I choose. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I will be A, watching, B, vote, C, contribute to election campaign, D, testify again when I return in the spring from my winter vacation outside. I think what underlines this humor is actually quite serious, because I think whether you're at the local or regional level, if you're an elected official, land use manager, or indeed citizen of the forest, you constantly struggle with reconciling competing uses of space. Your tension is to assure that there's an economic basis for the community to survive, indeed to prosper, while trying to harmonize yourselves with the changing environment that helps shape who we are, our view of the world, and our engagement with it. That challenge, I think, underlies the entire concept of the Alaska Coastal Rainforest Center. It's, in my view, about exploring our connectivity with the lands, the waters, and the peoples of the entire coastal forest without regard to political boundaries. And again, I tip my hat to Gordon and his recognition that we need to be constantly reminded of, and that is our systems don't, our ecological systems don't respect any political boundaries. It is in that context that I have the great pleasure to introduce our luncheon speaker today, Dr. Terry Chapin. Terry is a professor emeritus of ecology at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. His background is in plant physiological ecology and ecosystem ecology, with current interests in the resilience of social ecological systems. The central focus of his research is the study of the resilience of regional systems in the face of directional changes in climate, economics, and culture. He has posed as one of the most pressing challenges facing us as people the following question: how do we sustain the desirable features of Earth's ecosystems and society at a time of rapid changes in all of the major forces that govern their properties? This requires an understanding of the mechanisms that tend to maintain the system in its current status and the factors that cause changes to a new state. It also requires an integration of natural and social sciences because many of the drivers of change involve social ecological actions. Terry is a fellow of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and is a member of the National Academy of Sciences. Please join me in welcoming Terry Chapin.
Well, I really appreciate the chance to talk to you folks today. It's a very exciting symposium and a wonderful set of issues. First, I'd like to thank several of you specifically for sharing your sense of place with us yesterday on the boat. David Katzik, the other Tlingit culture bearers that were on the boat, and both the speakers on the boat and the speakers here today. I think collectively you've really done a wonderful job of defining what sense of place means, what it means in terms of the identity that each of us has with respect to a place, the respect that we need to have for the places that are special to us, and our responsibilities as citizens to keep those places special. One of the things that's really striking over the last, looking at the history of the Earth, this is the lower graph, both of these graphs are graphs of temperature variation, the lower one over the last 100,000 years, and the last one and the upper one over the last 1,300 years. And one of the things that's striking about the lower graph is that temperature has varied a huge amount over that time period. But during the last 10,000 years, it's not only been warmer than before, but also incredibly stable. And it's only during this period of stability that we've had the birth of all of the great civilizations, both the ones that we heard about this morning here in Alaska and the ones in Europe and other places. And it's only during this time that agriculture has been possible. And everything that we think of as culture, everything that we think of as things that are important to us as people, began during this period of stability. If we look more carefully at that period of stability, or at least the last 1,300 years of it, you can see that there's a few minor variations and wiggles in that, such as the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age. And these were times of tremendous social disruption, extinction of human communities, massive migrations, and so forth. And then look at the black line. That's the temperature record since people have started measuring it directly. And you can see that over the last 150 years or so, we're moving out of this zone of the Holocene stability into uncharted territory. And this gets back to what Kirk told us about first thing this morning. So given these changes that are happening and the important role of human activities in causing these changes, I think it's really clear that we need to develop a stronger sense of environmental citizenship and to build a science that provides the basis for that. So building a science of people with nature and a recognition that society has a responsibility to recognize its role as not only benefiting from nature, but also responding to it. And here in this graph, we often think of ecological processes and social processes as being two separate sets of issues, but they're clearly linked. Here it's described in just some very crude ways, but also in other ways, there's a lot of interactions between people and the rest of nature that we need to have a better understanding of, and we need to build the science of this human nature interaction. So one framework for thinking about this is Earth stewardship. And by that I mean the active shaping of pathways of change in social ecological systems to enhance ecosystem resilience and human well-being. And there's a few things about this definition that are perhaps worth thinking about. First of all, it assumes active intervention rather than responding reactively to environmental problems. It involves shaping change. It takes as an integral assumption that people are part of nature and that they need to be considered together. And there's two goals, ecosystem resilience and human well-being, both of which are equally essential. And trying to do one without the other is in the long term going to prove impossible, I think. So how do we motivate this stewardship behavior? And traditionally, I think we've relied a lot on regulations that tell us what we should do and what we shouldn't do, or especially what we shouldn't do, in order to constrain unsustainable behavior. And that's really important. It's done us a lot of good with Clean Air Act and so forth, but I think it's insufficient. One exciting approach that's emerged in the last decade or so takes more of a market approach and evaluation of ecosystem services. And this provides opportunities to subsidize sustainable behavior and to align economic incentives with sustainability goals. And one reason this is important is that it puts on the table some of the important benefits of ecosystems to society, such as the provision of clean water and so forth. But another approach and so this is another approach that I think is really important and adds a lot. A third approach, which hasn't received that much attention, which I think we should consider carefully, is the notion of sense of place as a motivation for environmental stewardship. I think many of us do things that are beneficial to the environment and are more likely to behave as responsible environmental citizens because we care about the reasons other than fear of regulation or economic motivation of what we do. And I think if we try to use these three complementary approaches in various combinations, we'll get much closer to the sorts of environmental citizenship that we need from everybody than if we rely on just economic motivations and fear of regulations. But sense of place is a complicated set of issues. It depends on the biophysical attributes of a place. It depends on the personal and psychological responses of individuals to particular places and their history of being in that place. It depends on social, ideological, and cultural perspectives of different groups. And it also depends on political and economic contexts in which issues are framed. And so there's no simple translation from sense of place to sustainable behavior. And there's no guarantee that sense of place is going to guarantee stewardship. For example, people in a community may care a lot about jobs and may have identity and a connection of place to their family history as loggers or miners or something like that. And it's difficult for me to see that one person's sense of place is inherently better than another. So given that there's conflicting identities and sense of place, how do we make use of this concept? I think just thinking about it simply, I think the first step is to draw on the attributes that unite all of us in our connection to a particular place. And often that takes a certain amount of discussion to know exactly what that is. And then to find ways to negotiate acceptable solutions on issues that create conflicts about how people should interact with a place. And so I'd like to go through 2 or 3 examples to show you what I mean by this. And the first example comes from New Zealand, the Waikawa catchment. It was first colonized by people of European ancestry about 150 years ago, first as the forests were logged, and then as it was converted into a grazing system for sheep. And gradually the lands deteriorated. There was erosion, eutrophication, and the wake-up call that there were problems were things that showed up in the estuary. One of the things that families from this watershed like to do every year was to take picnics and fishing trips out into the estuary where they would catch fish, whitebait, mussels, things like that. And then they were noticing that there wasn't any of that stuff there anymore. There was no reason to go there with their families for a picnic. And this really made people sort of sit back and say, well, what's gone wrong with this place? And they brought in a couple of ecologists and had discussions of this by the landowners in the catchment, and came to realize that it had to do with land use practices. And so they began discussing what they could do to turn this around, and realized that by restoring wetlands and riparian areas, they could do a lot to minimize the damage. And they've done this in such a way that as to use native species and make a long-term commitment to ecological and conservation renewal of the watershed, as well as just meeting the objectives of reducing erosion. And so this has been monitored informally by all of the individual landowners, semi-formally by Maori tribes, and then more formally by state, by government monitoring of water quality. And but basically what happened is they were able to, based on grassroots concerns, they were able to turn around a situation of degradation to one of a more sustainable trajectory. And it was relatively easy to do this in situation, and this happened within a year or so, because each farmer represented their own interests, and they all had a relatively common set of current concerns with respect to trying to get things turned around. The second example I'd like to give of a transition from degradation towards a more sustainable trajectory is in the Fiordlands National Park in southwestern New Zealand. Here there was a history that has been seen many places around the world of fisheries stocks being sequentially depleted from 1850 onward. The depletion started here later than it did in the rest of New Zealand because it was more remote and more challenging to fish there. But the same general pattern happened. And here the wake-up call was that there was more traffic in the Fiordland Sounds. First of all, from cruise ships that were being rerouted from the Middle East as a result of increased terrorism and challenges of working safely in the Mediterranean, so they went to safer places like New Zealand, and particularly the Fiordlands. And then also because roads were being built into these fjords that allowed recreational fishers to bring in boats, and people could see that the things that they really appreciated about the Fiordlands were likely to change unless they did something about it. And so again, a grassroots movement sprang up in which the stakeholders that were concerned about the Fiordlands got together to discuss what could be done to set things on a more sustainable trajectory. And so they got a group, representatives of all of the major stakeholders, the groups I mentioned, Maori tribes and others, to get together and to figure out what they knew what they had in common, that they cared about this place. They were committed to coming up with a solution, but they all had different ideas about how to get there. And but they made a commitment that they were going to reach a solution, and that they recognized that they had to do this through compromise, that nobody was going to get everything they wanted. And so they worked through this with the aid of a skilled facilitator over a period of about a decade. They worked out a solution. They presented it to the government, who codified it into law, and then the government turned back to them and said, okay, implement it. And they've been doing that since then with considerable success. And part of the success of this agreement is clear that none of the groups that were involved in these negotiations contested any of the final decisions about how it went. Once they came up with an agreement, they went ahead with it. And in another more contentious case that I don't have time to talk about, it was a similar set of issues. It was some 20 different stakeholder groups that were dealing with water management, and they also were able to come up with a solution. So in both of these cases that I've talked about, it was sense of place, caring about a particular place, that really got people motivated locally to get together and work out the problems and move towards a more sustainable trajectory. A third example is in New Jersey Pinelands in the east coast of the United States. And this is an area that's on a highway corridor between New York and Philadelphia. It was undergoing gradual, creeping, unregulated development. There were taxes increased as property values increased, and this threatened traditional agriculture and made it more difficult for local residents to be able to afford to live there. And so the response here came from an environmentally aware governor who established a commission to regulate development. But each of the communities that lived in this corridor were willing to go along with this regulation of development that constrained their own ability to tax residents and to allow development to occur. And all of this occurs because people in the community valued ecosystem services, and they valued affordable land more than they valued the additional tax revenue that would have come from continued development. So again, they stopped what seemed to be an inexorable process of development, and in a way that maintained community values. So it seems to me that regulations and economic incentives are important but insufficient motivations for stewardship, and that sense of place and the sense that each of us has that particular places are valuable can really be an additional motivation for stewardship. And it requires identifying our common goals and then finding a mechanism to explore the contested values that inevitably come out. But if it's negotiated properly, I think it can be a really powerful force for stewardship. So what are some of the general lessons that we can take from this? These are some things that I think are helpful to transforming towards sustainability. None of them's essential, none of them, but each of these adds to the likelihood that it'll occur. Commitment to sustainability of a place, because without that sense of place and commitment to it, there's no motivation to keep things on a sustainable trajectory. It's going to require collective engagement of key stakeholders, which entails a willingness to compromise, prioritizing long-term consequences over short-term benefits, recognizing the right to organize and manage once you have some potential solutions, the capacity to develop consensus on sustainable goals, and to work by monitoring and work towards implementation of those goals. And then flexibility to renegotiate the goals when in response to the inevitably changing conditions. So what does that mean for coastal rainforests in southeast Alaska? I think it's really clear that there's many people here who have a commitment to the sustainability of coastal Alaska. But I think it's useful to ask more explicitly, what are the values that everyone wants to sustain? What are the things that give rise to conflicts and disagreements? There needs to be collective engagement of key stakeholders, and the Tongass Roundtable seems to have been a wonderful way of moving along that pathway. And from what little I know about that process, the issues of willingness to compromise has been a continual issue with respect to the way that works. Prioritizing long-term consequences. I think there's good opportunities here because a lot of the issues that the Tongass faces or that Southeast rainforests face are long-term issues. It takes a long time to grow a tree. Fisheries are things which which, if they're overexploited, take a long time to recovery. The economy. All of these are really long-term issues. So it shouldn't be difficult for people to recognize the importance of long-term issues. Once these are recognized, then recognizing the right to organize and manage. If there are locally negotiated solutions that come up through a mechanism like the Round Table, do these groups have the power and the rights to implement solutions to really move things in appropriate directions? Is there the capacity to develop consensus towards sustainability goals and flexibility to renegotiate those goals in response to changing conditions, or do they get locked into a new set of regulations? More generally, one thing about, I think many stewardship goals are local, and each of us has a particular place, particular places that we care about, places that we live. We also have places where each of us uniquely has connections to other people, has skills, has understanding and knowledge of those places. And so I think there's things that each one of us can personally do to move the places that we care about towards stewardship. And so I think part of the issue of stewardship is each of us taking environmental responsibility to take responsibility to work towards developing and implementing those solutions. I'd like to just talk about a couple of issues with respect to things I've worked on in interior Alaska. This is some of the work that Scott Rupp's been doing in terms of showing what the patterns of past and future climate are likely to be. And one of the challenges in looking at things like climate change is it's difficult to sort of know how it hits us, how it really impacts us and individuals. So we all know what a warm year is and what a cold year is. We can see from this graph that we've had about 40 years of warming in Alaska. And if we go out another 40 years to 2050, if you look at the average conditions there, the average temperature, that's similar to what the warmest conditions are that we've seen historically. So many of you are going to see those conditions where what we now think of it as a typical year, and those will be very similar to what the warmest years are that we've experienced to date. Out of the end of the century, then the coolest years at the end of the century are going to be are likely to be similar to the warmest years that we've experienced to date. Those are big, big changes. And this has implications. So with respect to sea ice in northern Alaska, ice flows serve as nursing platforms and feeding platforms for walrus. And as these platforms move northward over the Bering Shelf, then the walrus can dive down, feed on the bottom, and come back and nurse their calves. But in 2007, for the first time, all of the ice moved north of the shelf break, which meant that it was too deep for walruses to feed, and they had to move ashore and abandon the ice. It's happened twice since then. That was the first time in oral or written history that had happened in 2007. It's happened twice since then, and projections are that it's going to become increasingly likely. So it's clear that the ecology of walrus is going to change. It's also clear that the cultural connections of people to marine mammals is going to undergo substantial changes in the future. In interior Alaska, fires have become more extensive and more severe. What this means is that the conditions for tree seedling establishment after wildfire are different. Rather than In the lower left-hand corner, you can see the way most post-fire stands have occurred in black spruce forests in the past, where you get a lot of the organic matter remaining and the trees rooted in this remain standing, and you can see that. On the right, you can see the situation, an increasingly common situation where the fires burn down to mineral soil. The trees rooted in that organic mat fall over, and this mineral soil becomes a good seed bed for deciduous trees. So it's quite likely, from what we know about patterns of succession, that this is going to change from being a black spruce-dominated forest to being a deciduous dominated forest. And that's not to say that's good or bad, but it's really different in terms of the ecology of interior Alaska. So what I've told you is that the ecology of Alaska is radically changing. Here's two maps. The map on the left is a map of the major vegetation types of Alaska, and the map on the right is a map of the major language groups of Alaska. And you can see that these two maps are virtually identical. And that's because over the last 10,000 years or so, the people of Alaska have lived in these places, have adapted to these ecologies, have shaped the ecologies of the places where they live through very close interactions with the ecology. And given that the ecology of this place is changing, what does this mean for the cultures of Alaska? I've got a huge amount of confidence in people that I've met in rural communities, of their ability to deal with change, to cope with situations that are difficult, and to find constructive solutions for the future. But it's clearly going to be a challenge, and the ecological changes are just one of the challenges. In combination with this, there's rising fuel costs. There's issues of fire risk around communities. And so fuel costs, for example, in many of these villages are approximately twice what they would, 2 or 3 times what they would be in Juneau or Fairbanks. And so if these fuel costs rise nationally or globally, if they double, as has been suggested perhaps by the end of the year, or if they quadruple or increase tenfold, what does this mean for the economies of rural Alaska? I think these are real challenges. So are there ways in which communities can address some of these challenges simultaneously through discussions of trying to think through things holistically rather than thinking through things one issue at a time? Another thing that I've learned, that I've been really grateful to learn from communities, is this holistic perspective on dealing with issues. And so one possibility is harvesting fuels that are a potential risk to communities immediately around the communities, using this as biomass for community heating, hiring local people to harvest the woods, which is the main cost of biomass as a heating source, and keeping those wages internally in the village economy rather than spending that money to bring in diesel fuels. So that's a way in which you can take challenges and think about how to cope with those locally. One thing I've gotten really interested in the last year or so is a community partnership for self-reliance, which I've been working on with people from the Alaska Native Science Commission and the University of Alaska. It's a partnership between university scientists and Native leaders. And the goal is to foster and enhance opportunities for self-reliance in the face of not only rising fuel costs, but the distinct possibility that federal and other government funding programs to rural Alaska may decline in the future. So the idea is to have discussions with communities about what's their vision of self-reliance and how they might enhance their own ability to address the issues on their own without depending on government programs and so forth, and then to find ways in which the university might be able to partner with them in helping them achieve their goals for self-reliance. In the process, we hope to set up a knowledge network by which lessons can be shared among communities, so that things that one community, good ideas that emerge from one community, have a chance to be shared. Now, one of the things, I think in general, in dealing with issues of sustainability, it's clear that we need substantial social change. And anytime there's issues of social change, some of these are going to work out better than others. So we need to have opportunities for experimentation. Now, the idea of social experimentation sort of gives me a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. But if we think of this as opportunities for different communities to take their vision of a more sustainable future, a more sustainable way to interact with their environment, then it becomes not a way of social engineering, but it becomes a way of empowering local communities to try out things that they think are good ideas. And that's sort of the notion behind this. So I just wanted to just give you an example from a couple of communities that we've been working with. Igiagik on the outflow of Lake Iliamna. We've met with leaders there in their community and with the community as a whole. And before going to the community, having read their website and talked to them, it seemed that food security was likely to be the big issue that they wanted. Well, let me just back up and say the way we made contacts with these communities was that over a couple of years we met with Native leaders and to work out how it was that the university might be able to partner with Native communities to do something that was beneficial to rural Alaska. And the idea was this community partnership for self-reliance. And we asked them, what are communities that are really doing a superb job of addressing difficult issues and doing a good job of this. And so they listed a dozen or so communities that they thought were doing a great job. Elaine Abraham was one of the people who's been involved in this community partnership. And so we wrote to those 12 communities and asked them if they'd be interested in working on this. And of those, 4 of them responded, and those are the ones we're working with. And so these ones that I'm wanted to tell you about are 2 of those communities. And through discussions with Igiagik, the issues that emerged that were of particular concern to them were maintaining traditional values, and where they could see ways in which they could assess the strength of these traditional values and ways in which they might be strengthened through issues of encouraging community leadership and capacity building, for example. They were also concerned about property rights as a result of sale of individual allotments. They were concerned about water rights with respect to Pebble Mine, food security, and they've already been doing lots of things with gardening where they produce a lot of their own food, and issues of energy security and renewable energy. So on each one of these, there's concrete steps where there's things that they already have underway, and there's ways in which the university or other agencies or other NGOs or other groups could partner with this community to address each of these issues. Newtok is a community that's well known across Alaska because it's one of the communities facing coastal erosion and has probably made more progress than any of the other communities towards relocation to a new site. And so in talking with community leaders here, we assumed that this village relocation would be the major issue. One of the things that was interesting there was that they didn't want us to take time away from the community to meet with the community because the community was really busy getting ready for the Alaska Native Arts Festival, and they were working in the school and getting their dances ready for the Alaska Native Arts Festival. So it's clear that they had that working on maintaining local culture was a part of their daily lives that set their priorities. So the issues that they raised were maintaining traditional values, and one of the things that one of the elders suggested was that she'd like to write a book about her stories of things that she had seen as ways in which the community had been able to maintain and strengthen traditional values during times of very rapid change. Energy security was another issue they brought up. And so here they were interested not just in the mechanics of relocating to the village, but how are they going to set up the community in a new place in such a way that would make it easier to have the sorts of interactions among households, the interactions that lead to that maintain a cohesive community. So how could they build housing that would be energy efficient so as to reduce their dependence on diesel? So think of relocation not as something bad that was happening to them, but as a unique opportunity to recreate their community, the structure of their community. So the next step in each of these community collaborations is that the community is going to tell us what are the areas of collaboration that they would like to interact with the university, then explore these options with UAF researchers and agencies, establish a knowledge network for sharing messages and finding ways to expand the effort beyond a pilot study with 4 communities to something that might be broader, and then revisit these communities to get more explicit in terms of how we actually, how this might actually play out on the ground. So going back to Earth stewardship, we need to build the science of human nature that integrates people with nature. But then it's a question of how we begin to apply the science. And I think here's a place where I think we need to begin thinking very carefully, because that's going to influence how we want to build the science. And part of it's engaging key stakeholders, and part of it's communicating the science in such a way as to support a social movement. I think things are changing so quickly that we don't have the luxury of just waiting until we know enough about the changes that are happening before we begin to implement things. So we need to have a social movement that's going to move things towards a more sustainable trajectory. In terms of engaging key stakeholders, I think students and the youth are a key group. It's their world. Oftentimes they're really passionate about what they'd like to see that world be, and by getting them involved in the decision-making process from the beginning, in designing the kinds of and asking the kinds of questions and designing the kinds of research, is going to make it much more effective in getting to where we need to go. Engaging Native communities, as is already happening here in Southeast Alaska, is really important. These communities know the history. They know what works in terms of sense of place as a motivation for caring for and respecting that place. Another thing I'm enthusiastic about is working with religious communities, communities of faith. These communities already accept stewardship as a key religious principle by which they operate. 50 to 75% of the American public strongly associates themselves with communities of faith and subscribes to the notion of stewardship. This spans a much broader political spectrum than the scientific community is likely to be able to communicate with. So I think we need to partner with messengers who are going to be more effective than we're likely to be in terms of building this social movement and coming to a common framework, so that environment is no longer an ideological or a political issue, but something we all subscribe to. I think we need to really engage carefully with businesses so that they're part of the discussion of what are the issues, how do we engage, what are the opportunities, and how can we help get them involved in coming up with solutions. They've got the power to make a lot of things happen, but they've also got the incentives to, many profit incentives to, that can use stewardship, use sustainability as an opportunity for new business opportunities. Practitioners and policymakers are groups that we've oftentimes worked with anyway, but we need to make sure that there's really close communication there. I think we need to, the communication needs to be more of a dialogue rather than a one-way transmission of information, and we need to spend a lot more time listening to what the issues are that need to be solved rather than telling people what they need to do. So, and also focusing more on solutions and less on the problems. As was mentioned earlier, if people are simply focused on the problems, you get into issues of guilt, fear, and disengagement from the problems rather than excitement about the opportunities for solutions. And I think we do need to create a social movement, so science needs to become much more action-oriented than it has been in the past, engaging leadership, as I talked about. So I think there's a lot that we can do to substantially improve the relationship between society and the biosphere. And I think the temperate rainforests are a wonderful place that's got a good head start, both because of the wonderful environment that's already present here and the wonderful ecosystems, but also because of the level of commitment and sense of place that many people have here. And stewardship provides guidelines for sustainability that can make use of that sense of place. But it's not something where we have the luxury of working towards doing this a decade from now. It's something that we should have been, where we really need to take action right now. Thank you. Any comments or questions, please?
I work with an environmental group within my school. I act as a student leader. And at this point, we're mainly focusing on educating the student body. I was wondering if you might have any recommendations on how children and students could be more involved in actual decision making and getting involved in community issues, as opposed to just learning about them.
That's a great question. Let me give you an example. I think getting involved in community gardens, stream restoration, getting involved in projects that are doing things rather than waiting for somebody else to do it. Once students get involved in, say, a stream restoration project or something like that, their parents are going to get involved. They'll get sucked in. And once the parents are involved, then it becomes a community thing, and you are the leaders rather than waiting for somebody else to be the leaders. So I think there's lots of ways in which education can be turned not as just a passive learning, but an active learning and doing kind of operation. So the kinds of things that student conservation groups and environmental groups are doing, I think give you wonderful opportunities.
Terry, a follow-up to that question. Some of the people in this room have helped as mentors in the Southeast Regional Science Fair, which is one way of elevating our scientific literacy so that we can communicate with each other in a scientific way. A question, would you talk more about your experience with One People, One Earth and moving beyond extant communities of faith to encourage all of us to encounter the profound, which we must, if we are to develop this commitment to place?
Okay, one group that's made an effort towards integrating science, native culture, and religion in Alaska has been something that Interfaith Power and Light, somebody from Interfaith Power and Light organized, called One People, One Earth. And we had one session in Fairbanks, one in Anchorage, and one in Juneau. And the idea was to bring together leaders from from many different religious faiths, from across the scientific community, and from various native groups around Alaska to address the issues of climate change, environmental degradation, and so forth by saying, here's 3 different perspectives: religion, native culture, and science, that all come up with the same set of answers to these and potential pathways to solutions. So let's forget about the things that separate us. Let's find the things that join us together and move more directly towards solutions. And so that's been the idea behind this effort.
Hi, Terry. Thank you very much for your comments and your focus on sense of place. My name's Linda Krueger, and I'm a social scientist at the Pacific Northwest Research Station. And those people who know me know that sense of place has been a focus of mine for my 20-year career with the Forest Service. And you said to take action. We have a book that will be coming out from Springer Publishing, probably in the late summer or fall, and I don't feel uncomfortable saying this since as a government employee I get nothing financially from this. The title is Place-Based Conservation, Perspectives from the Social Sciences, and it's co-edited by 3 social scientists, myself here with the Pacific Northwest Research Station in Juneau, Dan Williams, who's a social scientist with the Rocky Mountain Research Station in Fort Collins, and Bill Stewart, who's a social science professor at the University of Illinois. And it has, I would say there's probably 15 different chapters that are basically different stories about people who have implemented place-based planning, whether it's citizen science or whether it's grounding problems in place, collection of ideas and values of sense of place, and it brings these all together in one edited edition. And like I said, this will be available probably late summer or fall. I'm not sure how expensive it'll be. It's a pretty sizable volume, but the good part is there are several government researchers who contributed chapters. My name will be on 4 of them. Those will be free on the internet. And so all you have to do is go to TreeSearch, Treesearch, and type in Krueger, Kruger, sometime late summer or fall, and you'll be able to download any of those chapters that have my name on them and get those free of charge off the internet. So it's going to be a wonderful book, and I'd encourage you, if you're interested in what Terry's been talking about, lots of examples from across the United States, a couple from Canada, a couple with First Nations people, and Native, I think a Native American group somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, either Montana or somewhere in there, and I think it talks directly to what Terry's been talking about. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's exciting. It's also really important because I think part of the issue is how can we share what we learn about these things? And so I think each one of these stories has the potential to be a real inspiration for us in other places. So something like that begins to share these stories is really valuable.
Terry, I want to thank you for being here. And I wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that we're actually a lot further in our area than we think. I think that the science community, at least the folks that we're working with at Central Council, have been eager to learn about the traditional knowledges and the places and the history that no one else can give except that, for the Native people, indigenous people of this area. And I'm excited to say that, ACRC actually is going to be assisting us in developing some of the materials and studies that can support the together kind of like subsistence and the importance and the vulnerability that I think we all share in some likeness or some commonality around that. However, I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting the traditional ecological knowledge. We don't have to go very far for that. However, it is slipping away. So I want to encourage haste in that area. I also want to acknowledge the Southeast tribes who worked diligently this week, if you'll please stand. Southeast tribes who worked diligently this week to come to a consensus on what is the priorities of the Southeast Environmental team or Southeast Environmental tribal staff around the importance of including traditional ecological knowledge into policy. And one that they spoke of was this: assessing and evaluating management plans, assessing and evaluating Western science management of all resources, define and recognize what traditional use and management of same resources From this information, we will define and create a plan that incorporates both Western and traditional management based on the success and failures of each. This new management plan will be based on mutual acceptance and recognition. Those answers are within us, and together we can. And I just wanted to encourage the continued work together in acknowledgement of tradition, the importance of traditional ecological knowledge. So, Ganesh Chish.
That's wonderful. I totally subscribe to that. And one of the things that makes me really excited about this Rainforest Center is that so much progress has been made. And so I think with that kind of momentum, you can continue to do amazing things here.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Mayor Botelho. Thank you all for your comments and questions, and I hope you continue that dialogue as the day goes on. We have a few announcements. This group session here will turn into concurrent sessions. In this ballroom here, led by Tom Ainsworth of the National Weather Service and Aaron Hood from University of Alaska Southeast, From Sun to Sea, a top-down exploration of climate effects on the coastal temperate rainforest. And in ballroom 3, Adapt or Die, Mitigate or Fry, Adaptation and Mitigation Strategies, led by Dominic Della Sala. So that's where we're going to meet for 2 o'clock start, and that'll go from 2 to 4. And I'll introduce real quick Sanjay Piare, a professor of landscape ecology and GIS at UAS.
Thanks, Mike. What I have to say isn't very professorial, but let's see. Whoever said that that business and pleasure aren't compatible didn't know what they were talking about. Anyone who's done collaborative science or collaborative work knows that it begins with strong social interactions and strong social institutions and ties between them. And I've been talking with a lot of people here about how there's a missing component, and I'm lamenting the loss of a lot of the social interaction behind science, and that drives science. And so Mike and I would like to, along those lines, and mixed in with the key ingredient that is beer, right? Inaugurate the first ACRC social science event, and that's going to be tonight at the buoy deck across the way here between 5:30 and 8:30, and we hope you can join us. The speakers, we hope, will be there, and that's also a good point to interact with speakers, and otherwise just lubricate science. So.
The only caveat, well, there's going to be some food there as well, but the only caveat is we can't all fit. So you can do a rolling entry into it as well if you'd like to stop by for a little while. They have fire marshal restrictions at the buoy deck as well. So, and with that, just about the Coast Guard, our heartfelt condolences to the losses that occurred in Kodiak, and our sponsor from the Kodiak has spent quite a bit of time over there dealing with the tragedy there. So if there are anybody from the Coast Guard here, our heartfelt condolences to your community. I think we'll break, and we're going to move over to the 2 concurrent sessions, take a quick break, and we'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Am I on?